Welcome to the Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy, the free podcast for motivated teachers and school leaders who want to inspire their students and school community in literacy learning. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast player, and for more amazing literacy resources, check out the show notes provided with every episode.
And welcome back to our top 9 podcast countdown. So number 5 is effective literacy teaching in high schools with Misty. Now, Sharon, I'm sure there are so many high school teachers who are looking for support, and I think this one was really bumped up to the number 5 because of that.
Yes, yeah. Misty, of course, Misty isn't just a secondary expert, but this in particular, we don't have a lot of podcasts that are geared just for secondary, and so we're so grateful to Misty for being really intentional about speaking about secondaries in particular. There are 3 things that we'll just pull out from that podcast. Overall, it was really focusing on the importance of teaching discipline-specific writing skills. So this is a great podcast for anybody teaching writing in any area in high schools. Yeah. So not just literacy, or not just in English classes. Misty
talked about the key of writing as a mathematician or writing as a scientist. You know, whatever discipline you're in, you really are going to write in that discipline.
Yes.
And that was a real emphasis in that podcast.
Yeah. So 3 things that we have selected out of that was, the first one was loss of student motivation in writing.
Yep.
So what can we do in secondary school to move our students on from, because as happens, every teacher at every grade often says, wow, if only I had the students coming to me with this from their years before. So in primary schools, we still do that. Say, if only the last year's teacher had done this. In secondary school, we tend to go, well, if only they'd done this in primary school. So Misty actually gives some really good advice around if students have come off of that repetitive nature of certain writing structures, and you're finding that your students haven't got so much information about the organisation of text in lots of different subject areas, how you can go about that. So I think what makes Misty so powerful in this space is because she has primary and secondary experience here around writing, that she can really talk effectively about strategies that secondary teachers can use when students might not have experienced some things or have experienced some things in the primary setting. So I thought that section around that loss of student motivation in writing, she brings forth some really powerful tools, tips, techniques around that for moving students along. She does talk a lot about that overemphasis on writing structures, because we find our students falling into that as something that they've become familiar with, that sometimes in secondary we continue with those, or we might continue with them because as a teacher of maths or science or geography, that we might also, I'm going to say, default to writing structures because we think that will be the easiest way for our students to be successful at that form of writing, when structure alone isn't what makes a good writer.
No. It's just one aspect, isn't it?
It's one aspect.
But it's overemphasised.
It is overemphasised, and the template has become overemphasised. Yeah. So,
and that's all about professional learning for teachers, which is our next point.
Yes. Yeah. Do you want to talk through that one?
Well, Misty just said she worries about a lot of money going into areas that are not professional learning for teachers, and that is actually what will really change everything. When it doesn't have to be about writing structures, there's a whole lot of other things you can do. And Misty talks a lot about those things, so go back to that podcast, definitely. But all I can say is just, professional learning for teachers, really.
And really that key message about the professional learning is that we need it to be made a priority for us in our school sites as well as outside of. Because if we make it a priority, say within our discipline, then if we can collectively, be engaged in professional learning about that, for our discipline area, then it can really help us as teachers, to adapt what we do in our classes and engage students more effectively in that writing process. And that's what we're after. And I think as teachers, we often, we know what it is that we need to get better at things. Well, actually, sometimes we don't know what we need, but what we do know we need is we need more information about things. And we want to be pointed in the right direction. We don't want to be given a program or a pack of pro formas we know that we need, and I think this came up in our podcast before this one, that as professionals, we know that a package doesn't answer the questions. So she really, this importance of professional learning is paramount.
Key.
Yeah.
And I guess that's why everyone has rated Alan Wright's podcast so highly, and it leads really well into our next one, which is on the 6+ traits of writing. And that's really saying teachers are really wanting something that's going to lead them into better teaching of writing, Sharon.
Right. So we've got 3 podcasts high up on the list here, all relating to writing.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. It does tell us something.
Yep.
Yeah.
So number 4 is the 6+ traits of writing, which you know a lot about, Sharon, because you ran that one.
And this is that space that is there for primary and secondary teachers, because the traits of writing go across all year levels. And I think the value in it, of course, is the traits address, this isn't the first time we've mentioned the traits of writing in our podcast reviews here, because those 7 traits of writing encompass a much broader range of things than the very narrow track writing has been going down with templates and programs.
Which Misty talked about with the overemphasis of writing structures.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. So the traits actually just blows that open, or probably the wrong words, expands it away from...
Or enriches.
Enriches, absolutely enriches. And I think the traits alone, just becoming familiar with the traits, a lot of teachers will say to me, okay, that's a game changer in my own professional understanding. And in learning a little bit more about the traits, actually expands teachers' knowledge and helps them to feel more equipped about what it is I'm even teaching in writing.
Because the overemphasis of writing structures is actually only one of those traits, which is organisation.
Correct.
And that's 1 out of the 7. Now, let's look at those others, because that's going to make my writing fantastic.
And in fact, the template doesn't even address organisation well.
Okay. All
right. So there's more to organisation than a template.
Yeah.
So when we think about the traits of ideas, organisation, voice, word choice, sentence fluency, conventions, presentation, when we think about all of those things, it actually doesn't become an overwhelm. It becomes a very tight focus on, they're the things that need to appear on our plans.
Yeah.
Our plans for teaching, we're going to explicitly teach across those 7 things on cycles, like on spiral. We keep going through those things. We don't spend 10 weeks on one of them and, well, that wouldn't work because there's 7 of them. But actually, we've been spending a lot of time on one of them at the expense of all the others.
Yeah, so noted that that's an area that's a big area of need according to the podcast Big Nine. Oh, let's call it the Big Nine.
The Big Nine. And I know I'd have said it in the podcast, but the traits are written into the Australian curriculum in the literacy capabilities. They're also written into, or the English, so within English it's written in there. They're also written into, if we want to get really interesting, the marking criteria for NAPLAN actually looks at the writing traits.
Right.
So structure of the writing or organisation of it scores somewhere between 4 and 6 out of the 30-something points in the NAPLAN. So go diving in there for some interesting, comparisons to looking at. So I think sort of also linking to what Misty was saying in that number 5 podcast is I think we've been sold short by a lot of materials that have been published for us as teachers.
Yeah.
Really narrowing, and we need to be critical at looking at those pieces. All right. Off my soapbox.
Off your soapbox.
Can't leave writing traits, though, without talking about the other thing that's critical in working with writing traits, and that's the mentor text.
Yep.
And not only teaching our students about writing traits, but teaching them how to use mentor texts to help them learn so much about what good writers are doing.
So many traits within that writing.
Oh, every piece of writing is loaded with all the traits.
Yep.
Well, any piece of good writing. So let's go as far as saying literature, and that encompasses all forms from non-fiction to fiction to poetic, all forms literature.
So mentor texts are the secret weapon of writing traits.
Yes.
Teaching.
Yes.
Yep.
And of course, Northwest Education, who developed the 6+1 traits of writing, have a rubric for reception to year 2 or K to 2 and from year 3 to 12 against those traits. Ruth Cullum has written great things around those traits. I think I mentioned all of those things in the podcast.
Yep.
But, I hope this little snippet of something, if you haven't listened to it, is enough to make you go, do you know what? This could be a game changer for my writing.
Now we're going to the top 3 podcasts as voted by the listeners. This is getting exciting, folks. What do you think number 3 would be out of all those 90 or so podcasts?
I could not even hazard a guess.
So hard, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, we have...
At this point in time, we need to keep saying that it's, week by week, we see that things can shift in their order of what people are looking for and listening for.
But these top 3 at the moment must be really burning issues for teachers, I would say. Now, I've noticed a lot of teachers are asking about this number 3, which is differentiation. How do we achieve it? Now, this is with Rob Vingerhoets in maths, but it's also aligns with literacy. How do we cater for all students in our class who are very different? We've got very different needs, and how do we do it?
We sort of linked forward to this one in the last episode when we were talking about grouping. And that is, differentiation is often seen as, one of them is grouping is often seen as a way to differentiate.
Yep.
And the second thing that's often seen as the way to differentiate is to give, and this really aligns to the groups, is that we give different groups of children different things to do. Whereas in this episode, Rob really highlights how same task, ensuring every child has an entry point and that there's no ceiling.
Yep.
So that differentiating tasks shouldn't be, I have to make a separate task for this group of children, a separate task for this group of children, and a separate task for this group of children. The tasks that we have should enable every child an entry point.
Yeah, it's the task is the key, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's what we talked about with Rob.
Yeah.
That's what allows them to go off and do it at their own level.
Yes,
Yep.
yes. Because if we've chosen something, so we might say, oh my goodness, if it's got an entry point so every child can enter, are we just in a space then that means those who can go way beyond that, are they going to be disengaged at that level?
Mm.
Rob talks a lot about how do we make, particularly in maths, he's talked about how do we make the task so that everyone can enter into it but not be constrained by a low ceiling.
That's right.
It needs to be, he talks a lot about open-ended tasks. And if we link that to literacy, when we talk about good reader, good writer strategies, there's an entry point for everybody, but not a ceiling. It's not, I'm constrained by this. And so the type of task, the way we word things, that's our challenge for really powerful differentiation.
And the language we use as a teacher when we're setting that task, how we talk to them. I noticed you talking to a group of teachers the other day about that, Sharon. How do we move the children off into that task? It's the language you use, and maybe there's an online course in that, because I think to show teachers how that can work is really a key to how we get those students going. The other interesting factor Rob talked about was students learning from each other. We don't just have one teacher in the classroom. We have multiple teachers in the classroom, and we allow that to occur. So that's why grouping has to be flexible as well, because if we just go fixed group for the whole term, how can we learn from others in our classroom who are switched on with that piece of learning? I can't go over to that student because I'm in this fixed group over here.
Okay, that switched on bit. So then we're saying, okay, some children get it and some children don't. But what we want is children being able to share and reflect on what they did do. And
that's switched on as well, isn't it?
Yes.
Everyone is switched on.
Everyone is switched on.
Wherever they are.
Yes.
That's a really good point.
That's why we use the words striving and thriving.
Yep.
Now, I'm listening to those words now. I'm wondering whether that's even what we want to say. But striving means, I think all of us, we're striving.
Maybe
we're striving. All of us are strivers.
All of us striving, and all of us are thriving.
Yeah.
We're all strivers and thrivers wherever we are in the situation in the class. So that's a turning point for us, Sharon.
Yeah. Yeah. We can't just, we can't group children like that all the time. Can we go, they're a striver, they're a thriver.
Yeah.
A striver in what? A thriver in what? Yeah. Any of us at any time is striving and thriving.
And Rob's point of all of us being able to learn from each other was that, we can go to somebody else who has got what we need at that particular point to share with us. So, yeah.
Well, and I also think we are our most important sharer of ourselves. Sounds weird. But reflecting on what we've just done or what we're trying to do, and to be able to go, this is what I'm trying to do and it's not working. So, okay, who might I ask? Who might I go to? But I need to go to somebody else with, this is what I've tried. What did you try that's different from what I did that might help me? Or, as I saw in a Year 1-2 class yesterday, I saw them continue to strive. Right, I tried this, that didn't quite work. Let me try. And like the stamina that these Year 1-2s had, I absolutely acknowledge what Rob's saying about, that we are all teachers within the class. And I think where that is so critical is when we come together at some point to do some sharing.
Yep.
And not to jump in too early with a child going, I'll just go and ask so-and-so, or I'll go and ask for help from here. I think what we want them to do first is know, what have I tried? So that when I go to somebody, I can be quite explicit myself about saying, I tried this, I tried that. What have I missed here, or what?
And the self-reflection in that process before they come to the share.
Yes, self-reflection has got to be so, it's underutilised. And I feel like, that 5-6 class that I sometimes talk about, that, they were being grouped and always staying with the teacher, but once we released them and they could come back saying, well, this is what I tried and this is what I did, it changed them entirely from I can't do it to, well, I tried this and actually look at what I've done.
Yep. So let's wrap up that one, Sharon, and going on to the top 2 podcasts currently.
Yes.
Number 2 is How to Teach Comprehension with Diane Snowball. So
and if you're going to get expert knowledge around comprehension, you'll get it with Di.
Yeah, in fact, she produced over in New York a whole range of CDs in...
Yeah, well, they're available here.
Yeah.
Well, actually, they're not available anymore. They're out of print.
Yeah. But I think if anyone was wanting those, just write to us and we'll work out a way of getting them to you.
Yes, yeah. Di has really done a lot of research and thinking about what does teaching comprehension look like within the classroom across the year levels. So once again, this is a primary and secondary school episode. She talks a lot about the gradual release of responsibility in teaching comprehension, so that it's not just something like we're applying it. We're seeing how it's done. A teacher showing us how does that work when they are reading.
So modelling that in a read aloud.
Or shared text. But seeing it and hearing it and knowing what we're doing here.
Yeah. And when I go off to my reading, it's been modelled and I know to try that comprehension strategy in my reading as I have seen it modelled.
Yes, to be applying it, to be really active. And I'm just going to say here, I'm sure Di says it, but if not, let's link it to what Misty said too, is a comprehension worksheet is not what we're talking about.
A reader action.
It's and for our older readers, those who are entering into chapter books, we need to be teaching them, like not just to teach comprehension strategies in isolation of each other, because over the life of a chapter book, I need to be drawing on all of my comprehension strategies to be able to integrate, bring those comprehension strategies together so that I can do the big work of thinking my way through an entire book.
Because Di talks about starting with a focus strategy but quickly integrating it with other strategies.
Yes. So we can have the focus, but then how does that work with others? So that's where a worksheet doesn't cut it. How does this look as I'm reading, and how am I using multiple strategies? How am I integrating that with others so that I am being, and this doesn't just wait until I start chapter books. This is my comprehension. In fact, our students' comprehension isn't just isolated to written text. We use comprehension when we listen. So when we're hearing others
read aloud,
or we're hearing, a audio book, or we're viewing something, we are listening and we are viewing. So in all of these spaces, comprehension is building. So we need to be teaching comprehension strategies within all of those contexts.
Right from 5-year-olds, because we don't need to be able to decode a text to comprehend.
No, well, we actually are developing comprehension strategies way before we actually learn to read, to decode a text.
Yeah, which is a whole nother podcast. But that's obviously a podcast that people are really keen on solving their comprehension teaching.
Yes, yeah. So gradual release, that integration of strategies, modelling of them, which is, comes up, and that balancing of that teaching of comprehension strategies and their independent use of them. Like, there's no point doing the teaching if they're not getting to use it.
And now the number one podcast that is currently the one that people have downloaded the most is the language experience approach with Diane Snowball.
Yeah, so Di, done it again.
Yep.
Di has such rich lived experience across everything that she talks about.
Yep.
And the language experience approach, which is something that loved when this podcast first came out, the number of people who actually wrote back and made connections with it saying, use this somewhere else in the world and it was called this, or, I think I've done elements of it but didn't know that it was like, this is something to have in your toolkit. Like, this is such a powerful tool, once again, across primary, secondary.
Yep.
It isn't isolated to
younger
children and that setting. And in fact, this spills into, as I should have said, I'm sorry I haven't acknowledged this, but in the preschool setting.
Definitely.
And that's true for other podcasts.
And parents at home with their children.
Yes. So the language experience approach, it's taking advantage of experiences shared with individuals or groups that then get recorded, get written, so that students have got those
as material to read.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's full of things, once again, comes back to what Alan Wright was talking about with choice, having choice. What are we going to write about? The experience that they've had, whether it's a shared one or an individual experience they've had. So it's relevant, it's motivating, and then they get to, here's reading material that they get to illustrate, but they get to read it again, hold on to it, read it over and over again, come back to it, but gives them, and it's full of richness of vocabulary that they've been able to speak, and we've written down, and also written in the way that they speak.
Yep.
So, we're absolutely honouring the voice of the speaker. So, language experience, a powerful approach for helping, we've got here struggling readers, but for those who are disengaged or who are striving, let's use that word striving here, powerful for helping them, individuals of all ages. I tell you a group we've not even acknowledged here, and that is those who have English as a second language and who are learning English. This is powerful for them as well. So, a powerful approach for helping striving readers of all ages and students who need personalised and engaging reading materials. This answers for every time someone will say, I can't find something to match this student to. This is what creates that kind of material. It can lead to the creation of books and texts that students can read and use for ongoing learning, which just makes it an entirely critical and valuable resource for all kinds of literacy instruction, not just the reading. And it can become, there is a routine that you can use to develop it.
Definitely.
So this routine, Di talks about that, how to go about doing it. All we can say is not only are people clearly gaining a lot from this podcast. If it's a podcast that you haven't delved into and you're thinking, oh my goodness, if that answers, there's somewhere for me to go, no matter what age group I'm working with, and that's something that I'm looking for. Go to Di, have a listen and find out how that can play out for you and your students.
Really interesting how we connected the podcast today that we were talking about, Sharon. Thank you for everyone for joining us today. We've loved to see that so many of you have subscribed to our episodes from all corners of the world. The Teacher's Toolkit podcast is all about giving you an insider's guide to top teaching ideas, tools, techniques in literacy teaching and learning. Please subscribe to our weekly newsletter via the website. You'll receive advance notice on blogs, podcasts, events, and ways to contact us. Thank you, Sharon, and all the best to you, our listeners.
And I'm sorry, but I just have to say one more thing before we go, is like that was such a celebration of the top 9, and I think other things. We're just saying they were the most listened to. It doesn't mean they're more important than others, but such a celebration of the things that have been caught by all of those who've been generous of their time to share that in podcasts, and they're regulars. They'll all be back, to do more. And I hope it's also a celebration for listeners too of things that they've gained from podcasts that may have changed things that they've done, and to, if it's made a difference for you, to go, that's something I can share with somebody else.
Yep. Because
look at what it did for me.
Yep.
So
no, I really enjoyed speaking about them and connecting them.
Yes. Yeah. And actually felt like a good thing to do as we're sort of coming towards the end of season, 3?
Yeah.
Wow. Season 3. To look at what over time has really, as I said, been caught and been put out there into the world.
Yep.
So well done, Phil, for bringing all of this, getting all of this together. You're the one that's got, your eyes on what's happening with, who's finding what interesting, and thinking about what things, who to get onto the podcast, what things that we want to bring to people. So, really love that as we're coming to the end of the season, bring you a bit of a look back at 3 years.
Well, I think the podcast today was a bit of a reflection on some of the highlights. Not to say any other podcast is better than another, but it was a good reflection of what our listeners are really needing, wanting, and might guide us for the future and what we're going to choose in podcasts.
And also a little reflection on, wow, look at what we've done over 3 years. It's pretty.
Thank you, everyone, for being with us today, and all the best to you, our listeners.
Yes, thanks, everybody. Happy listening.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. To make sure you don't miss any literacy learning tips and insights, please subscribe to our show on your favourite podcast player. At Q Learning, our literacy specialists draw on over 30 years of teaching and international consulting experience to deliver world-class learning solutions. We equip, empower and support teachers to become their authentic selves. To find out about upcoming webinars and about how Q can help you and your school, visit qlearning.com.au. And you can get even more amazing teaching resources right now at teachific.com.au. Stay tuned.